Hello. So for those of you who saw the keynote I gave yesterday, this is going to be on like a very similar theme, but I tried to make a different framing so that it would be useful, interesting to you. And for those that weren't here yesterday, I will try to make this understandable. This will be a shorter talk, about 10 minutes, and it'll be about AI safety for open-ended creative systems. So this is a session on different kinds of paradigms, new paradigms in AI safety. And sorry, is it paradigm changes? What's the? Yeah, changes in paradigms. And so this is about, on the sort of object level, about a new sort of paradigm that might be coming up in machine learning. And on the meta level, it could be about how AI safety reacts in general to new kinds of research agendas that are coming out of machine learning. Many of us are familiar with traditional evolutionary algorithms. They are just sort of like black box optimizers. And there are some in the evolutionary computation community who are kind of aiming at more ambitious aims with evolutionary algorithms to kind of recapitulate the entire diversity of life in one run, just like happened in biological evolution. So I'm not going to talk at length about the motivation for this, but you can imagine that there could be algorithms that take inspiration from evolution more directly and try to create really diverse things that could lead to, for example, human-level AI as one of their aspirations. And another way to kind of look at this is to imagine a kind of a speculative trend in sort of machine learning research. So that gets sort of more and more meta. And so a lot of research in machine learning is on maybe directly learning some problem. So you directly optimize from some objective, like you train a convnet to recognize images with gradient descent. And then recently there's been interest in meta learning. So optimizing for the ability of an agent to learn from experience. So you're optimizing so an agent can then learn. So you can imagine techniques like recurrent networks that maintain state over multiple exposures to different learning environments. So they can kind of actually embody learning algorithms. Or if you're familiar with the mammal approach to meta learning, it's you're trying to learn a parameter vector from which you can easily optimize to solve new tasks. And it operates through some gradient, through a gradient technique that's kind of clever. You can imagine maybe this trend will kind of continue. Meta learning almost everything, or meta learning. So if you think of a human is a system that itself can learn to learn. Evolution is something that produced things that learn to learn. So it's sort of like meta learning is one way to look at biological evolution. So these could be systems that learn to create agents that can learn to learn from experience. And maybe you could imagine more meta levels, although that's maybe a bit extraneous or necessary. So things like biological evolution, evolutionary algorithms that are aiming at this sort of objective, and these tend to be sort of open-ended and creative processes because it's basically the system is now kind of undertaking a research agenda of its own. So that's one way to look at biological evolution, is researching all these different ways to create intelligent animals. And one way to look at this is the research agenda that the machine learning community itself is undertaking, and that it was necessary for it to be an open-ended creative system, and still is, machine learning is. There's many twists and turns that have gone through machine learning research, changing paradigms from symbolic systems to neural networks, to bio-inspired things, expert systems, rise and falls neural networks on several occasions, deep learning now. And this probably isn't the final paradigm, or maybe it is. There could be new things that come up in AI research as well. Changing prospects, people have different levels of optimism about how ML is doing. There have been many AI winters. Right now we're sort of in a hype cycle. And so this is just thinking about what kinds of efforts are undertaken to create new advanced machine learning algorithms. And you basically, as a community, we know that we need sort of a very broad search in order to succeed at our aims. We don't know where exactly we're going. So this is one way of thinking about why biological evolution is also sort of this kind of broad, open-ended search. And so the idea is that if this kind of trend in machine learning of going more meta continues, then we might need to take that seriously from an AI safety perspective. Are there particular safety considerations that come about when you have to deal with these more meta-level approaches to generating AI. And this could be an example of a changing paradigm that AISafety should kind of take into account. I'll just kind of go briefly over one proposal in this space just to kind of orient us, to ground us out a little bit, what I might mean by this sort of meta-level creativity. So a colleague of mine at Uber AI Labs, where I work, released this paper called AIGAs, AI Generating Algorithms, an alternative paradigm for producing general AI. And the basic proposal is that instead of creating all the building blocks for AI, which is sort of like what the ML research community does, we maybe propose a new neural network layer or a new kind of neuron or a new kind of learning algorithm, instead of this manual engineering approach where the community as a whole is discovering new building blocks and with the eventual aim to assemble them all to some complex machine capable of AGI, instead you might want to just create an algorithm that itself will undertake that kind of research agenda on its own. And so he kind of has a proposal where there's 3 pillars of what he sees as AI generating algorithms. So you might need an algorithm to meta-learn the architecture. So an example of this is sort of like neural architecture search, if you're familiar with that kind of thing, where you're actually looking for new kinds of convolutional networks or new building blocks that could make for effective neural networks. You might also need to meta-learn learning algorithms themselves. So you would want to create a system that could learn how to learn. And then the third pillar of his approach is generating effective learning environments. So you, in order for a system to learn to do new things, you might need to have a wide variety of tasks in which it can learn. And so he proposes some idea of like open-ended generation of new environments. So an environment, learning how to generate environments that can seed new learning in your agents. And so this is just one idea of how you could, it's a speculative proposal. There's not necessarily a concrete idea of how you combine all these things into an AIGA. But this could be a vision for one of these meta-level systems. And so the ambition of these systems is a little bit greater than your typical ML algorithm, because it's trying to seek to reproduce sort of the activity of the ML community. And the machine learning researcher who's creating these sorts of algorithms actually is, in effect, a meta researcher, kind of creating a creative system that is doing the ML research. And so this is a much more indirect way of producing artifacts. And so this might have a different sort of safety profile than a normal algorithm. And overall, when you're thinking about the sort of creating a creative system, then from a safety perspective, then what you're dealing with is sort of this tension between creativity, so sort of going out and exploring and discovering new things, and the tension between that and control. So how do you actually innovate in a safe way? And this is, you can imagine that this is sort of related to the more broad concept in human society of responsible innovation, that we hope that as humans, as we explore science and technology and are creating new AI algorithms, that we're doing so in a very responsible way. And so there could be similarities then between considering AI safety for these kinds of open-ended systems like the AIGAs, and thinking about, in general, how do we want to incentivize more responsible ML research? So there's some connection here between the process of AI safety itself, what we're trying to do, and the trying to do to create safety within these sorts of systems that are in fact doing what the machine learning community is doing. Okay, so sort of like a rough ride, and I would like to, a quick ride here. I'd like to really highlight that it's possible that these sorts of open-ended creative machine learning systems could become a more popular paradigm in the future. They would certainly seem to kind of fit the trend in going from object-level learning to meta-learning and perhaps higher. And an open question that I have is, how do existing safety proposals interact with these sorts of systems? Do they require new sorts of thinking? And maybe more generally, beyond just this sort of meta-level proposal for AI algorithms, certainly we're aware as researchers that paradigms in machine learning and AI change over time. And can safety anticipate these kinds of changes ahead of time, or be so generally formulated that it can apply to all sorts of search processes, regardless of how they're concretely formulated? And how do we deal with these sorts of unknown unknowns of how ML research will unfold in the future.